Andrew left out that I know his father very well.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. Good evening to everyone. And on behalf of City and State, thanks for coming to this event. Andrew and his colleagues asked me to open the program. Now, come and grab some. Let me do a little, seating here. Don't be shy after you've picked up the cheese plate and the beverages, and come fill in some of the seats here up front. And do that while I'm talking. Please know, let's not go overboard with formalities. Andrew and his colleagues at City and State asked if I would say just a couple of brief remarks, as he said, to sort of frame the discussion. It's a sort of challenging thing to do because obviously economic development is a very big topic. But I can say a couple of things just from the standpoint of Empire State Development, the Department of Economic Development, which is the organization I run on behalf of Governor Andrew Cuomo. And what I want to do is just sort of do that framing by mentioning 2 or 3 principles that guide our work, and then the panelists will no doubt explore or kick around in their discussions. Now, the first, I say this with the glaring afternoon sun coming right down in EJ's eyes, but in the front row here. But I think the first observation is that what's most helpful for economic development in New York State are those policies that really affect the macroeconomic conditions and the broader business conditions of the state. And certainly we've seen the governor's commitment to making reforms that improve the overall business climate for all of the state's employers. So think about New York as a $1.2 trillion economy spread across 62 counties with over 500,000 actual employers. And so it's so very important. I come back to this all the time, and yes, EJ and Heather and others know, Marcia knows, much of this comes from what I learned when I was at the Business Council, but it's so very important that the fiscal discipline that the governor and leader and Senator Skelos is here, his colleagues in the Senate, colleagues in the Assembly, the legislature working together with the governor. It can't be underestimated how important the fiscal discipline, the getting runaway state spending under control, the property tax cap, the most recent reforms providing, for example, an elimination on the 9A corporate business tax to upstate manufacturers, the property tax credit for upstate manufacturers, the reduction of the 18A assessments. These, inside this room, I think people get it. Certainly, my sense is that, and I'm with employers, I'm with CEOs and investors all the time, they're getting that message that those reforms to the state's business climate are starting to change the state's reputation, and we all know what that reputation has been over the years. And frankly, I call those reforms, they're critical steps toward building investor confidence in New York State. And it's investor confidence, private sector investment in companies that leads to investment and jobs. That's the crux, right? That's the goal of economic development. So the first principle would be that we have to continue to advance and support policies that make the state more competitive from a tax and regulatory standpoint and improve the broader business climate. And that's clearly what will enable us to attract more and more investment, and frankly enable me and my colleagues at ESD to work with even more and more companies. The second principle, when you have a mature sort of post-industrial economy like we do in the state of New York, is to remember that most economic development is really working with the companies you already know. It's that old adage that it's easier to work with an existing customer than to go out and find a new one. And if you think about the size and scope and diversity of our economy, you see the great opportunity for private sector investment and job creation just by working with our in-state companies, large and small, in sectors all across the state. And as a simple measure of that, and don't let EJ take this as an overstatement of economic activity in the state, but we had a record year at Empire State Development last year, in the sense that we had close to 400, actually 375 incentive projects that were accepted by companies, a lot of them with small and mid-sized companies, many with upstate companies and manufacturers, but these were projects where we were working with companies that were poised to make investments and expand their facilities, which again, a good marker of economic activity in a gradually recovering economy, but ready to make them out of state, ready to expand elsewhere, not convinced for a whole host of reasons they wanted to do that work here. And when those companies sort of satisfy the but-for test and we're convinced that but for our assistance is not going to happen, we can make a modest partnership or investment in those projects. So point being, of the 375 projects we did last year, probably 85, 90% were in-state companies. Most of our work is with existing employers in the state. We want to capture their investments and their growth here, and if we don't, often again, that is going to happen in Texas or North Carolina, Boston, down south, you know the states. And so the theme number two, or point number two, is so much of economic development is really understanding the companies you already have, your local economy, working locally, and making sure it's economic gardening 101, that you're kind of watering and fertilizing in your own backyard and working with great companies, large and small, from across the state. Point three is the best way to do that, I've found in the last 3.5 years working for Governor Cuomo, is the system he's developed, again, with the cooperation of Leader Skelos and others in the legislature, the regional council system. And I say that because, and this has just been a remarkable thing for us to witness at ESD, we are in a sense the operating agency, the infrastructure or back office for regional councils. But those 10 regional councils, driven by volunteers, 25, 30, 35 volunteers in each council. Marcia's here. We've got other council members probably in the room. But they turn out to be the volunteer kind of army behind our state's economic development system now in the following way. Just a little bit of math. ESD has 430 employees, right? Spread over 10 offices, New York City, Albany big offices, Buffalo big offices, 7 other. If you just do the math, there's no way that a group of 400 people, no matter how hard we work and how much we cared about all this, there's no way we could figure out how to deploy precious taxpayer dollars to the right projects across an economy that's so big and so vast and diverse. So what's happened is, and that's the reason we had that 375 number, and it was a similar number the year before, what's happened is that if you think of regional councils as an economic development delivery system, there's a leveraging effect with each council. So the council has 30 people officially, including members of the legislature, local government officials, business leaders, education leaders. Each actually has 2, 3, sometimes as many as 400 volunteers on work groups and committees. If the number was 300, you're talking about 3,000 volunteers across the state looking for economic development projects. They're talking to local companies, they're talking to local governments about infrastructure, and it's an economic development discovery system, and I mean that literally, discover, take off the cover. They are unearthing opportunities for us we never saw before, and that my colleagues and I, frankly, wouldn't see either. And so the regional, if you recognize that we need to, from time to time, this is the part, I know EJ's going to give me a hard time later, but if you recognize that, for better or for worse, from time to time we do need to deploy taxpayer dollars in partnership with companies to get them making investments here in the state, nature of the beast of economic development, that at least you want to do that in a limited and targeted and focused way where the projects aren't being selected by me, an Albany bureaucrat here in the Capitol, but they're coming from the community, they're coming from local stakeholders, and by the way, they're coming with local support baked into the deal. Jerry Kremer knows what I mean. The project, by the time it comes through that system, has the local elected officials, the local IDA, the local chamber, Marcia, whoever, people, the projects come to us with all that local support, and they move a lot faster and a much greater return and much greater efficiency. And the fourth and final point would be the leveraging of higher education institutions, and we see this in the prominent example of Startup New York, the governor's newest economic development initiative, again, crafted in close cooperation and partnership with the Senate and the Assembly and legislative leaders. And Startup New York works off, as you all know, this very basic idea that New York has a distinctive asset other states do not have. The New York public education infrastructure, again, if you think geographically, you think 65 SUNY schools, 22 of which are two-year community colleges, and over 150 private and independent colleges and universities spread across 62 counties from Montauk to Senator Skelos and I were actually just talking about Jamestown, the other western end of the state. All across the state, you've got this public education infrastructure of leading institutions with different capacities, different levels of research, different levels of expertise that become really, and this is the governor's point that we're leveraging with Startup New York, a foundation for a real innovation economy, which clearly is based on intellectual capacity, research, R&D, and those unique partnerships between companies and schools that share something academically with the mission or the activity of the business. So, in Startup New York now, we have, I think it's 13 universities that have approved startup zones, tax-free zones on their campuses. But it's not limited to 13 because the school, especially the SUNY schools, propose multiple sites. University of Buffalo gave us 13 sites in one application. So they now have 13 tax-free zones at UB, and I think they want to come back and ask for more. RIT was just approved by the Startup Approval Board. Again, that's a special group that approves the applications of private universities with representatives of the senator, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the governor. And they just approved the first application, which was RIT's application, obviously out of Rochester. So it's the first private school to enter. But the point here is we're just beginning this system now. The spaces are coming online. There's a lot of interest from business, and from the businesses you would imagine find this appealing. But think of it again as leveraging a unique economic development asset, which is this higher education system, both public and private, we have in the state, which, by the way, historically, we've seen the problem, we're especially familiar with it upstate, has produced graduates and students and intellectual property that has quickly fled to other states. So many are the stories of young people who graduate and move out, or IP that's licensed and goes someplace else. And so part of what we're trying to do with the Startup New York program is capture those graduates, those postdocs, capture the companies that come from the discoveries and innovations of those campuses, and yes, create a platform by offering a complete elimination of New York State and local taxes for a 10-year window, create a platform for out-of-state companies to come into New York State, get into this market, tap into the expertise of the schools, and yes, in the third instance, as you know, I'll go back to my economic gardening point, existing New York State employers poised for expansion don't have to do that expansion in Texas. They can do it right here and actually for 10 years have a better tax climate in startup than they would have in Texas. A point I made was kind of fun for me just personally because I was in Houston promoting this program last fall, and to go to Houston and say that we can give you a better than Texas tax climate, at least under these conditions, for up to 10 years it's a fun thing to be able to say. But more importantly, it's actually true. So between those four, again, Andrew, I just wanted to, at your suggestion, touch on those themes that guide our economic development work and recognize, because I know it's a subject, CSA's written about this, and we can do more of this offline or later, these initiatives like the regional councils as an economic development delivery system, they increase value for taxpayers because they drive efficiency into the economic development process. We see projects we never would see. We fund things, frankly, or support things that that would just be too inefficient for them to make it all the way up to get state support here in Albany. Remember that last year, just as an example, and I'll be done. But last year, the regional council system included 12 state agencies and 21 funding streams, some of them federal, all in one place, the CFA or Consolidated Funding Application. By the way, Governor's Office just announced today for 2014 the new round of regional councils. Marcia's taking note because she's got projects in Westchester. But the deadline for CFA applications will be June 16th. And I can tell you now, we will have thousands of applicants then, of great applications from projects all across the state. So the efficiency of that system guides our work and provides much greater value and transparency and results for taxpayers, because these are scarce taxpayer dollars that we're investing into these projects. And the Startup New York program goes a whole nother step further by creating an entirely new package of incentives, again, that full-on 10-year tax abatement, for companies at different stages of development, frankly, different industries, but most importantly, leveraging this very powerful tool we have not fully leveraged as a state, our higher education institutions. So there's a backdrop and some things for the panelists, I would hope, to ponder and think about. And as you do that, of course, I'll escape from the room. But Andrew, let me turn it over to you, and I guess you can introduce your first panel.
Yes. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. And we do have plenty of seats, so if anyone wants to grab a seat right now, you can sit down. This first panel is Bringing Business and Development to New York. We have a great group of panelists here. You can read their bios in your program. We switched things up a little bit, but I'll just briefly introduce him. Next to me is E.J. McMahon, one of the state's foremost budget and policy experts, now president of the Empire Center for Public Policy. Next to him, Syracuse Mayor Stephanie Miner, mayor of one of the largest cities in New York, the outgoing co-chair of the State Democratic Party. Next to her is Orange County Executive Stephen Newhouse, elected last fall. A lot of exciting things going on in Orange County. And at the end is John Gambaroni, a managing director in Accenture's strategy practice. And I'll start it off with the county executive. When you were running last fall, you had this 1,000 jobs in 1,000 days program. If you could tell us a little bit about that, and what can people do, elected officials, on a local level? We've talked about some state level initiatives, but what can you do?
Great, thank you, John, and I'm also honored to be here as well. Ken said it best when you talk about New York State. This is a home rule state, so unless you have the support of your local community, you're not going to get anything done. That's the bottom line, in my opinion. I was a former town supervisor before here. The reason why I'm here as a county executive is we were one of the top business locations in the Hudson Valley, and I think that's why it was on the mind of the voters. So at the end of the day, what we're seeing in Orange County now is we made a series of recommendations to our IDA, our Industrial Development Agency, our partnership, which we all work together as one team. One of those things is shovel-ready sites. And what we've seen in the last 3 to 4 months is major companies coming here. Orange County is a destination to begin with. We're in a good location, but we're also known for being pro-business. So what we've seen is major companies like Amy's Foods, which is a West Coast operation, moving a major catalyst, and I see Ken nodding his head. We were partners with the governor and Empire State Development on making that happen, 650 jobs. They're moving full speed ahead, a very unique company of the future. They basically have a doctor and a nurse working for them to take care of their staff, which is, I think, very forward-thinking. A couple other companies we have is like Kicker Frosch Brewing Company. We're actually stealing a company from Europe because of their shrinking of the workday and the work week. We've now brought this huge Greek beer manufacturer, bringing 200,000 barrels of beer a year, over 120 employees. Major investment in our county, and they're doing a remediated site, so it's a double pleasure. We also have healthcare is booming. What we have Crystal Run Healthcare, which is a very forward preventative care operation, which is really taking the region and the country by storm. They're building a 200-employee facility in Newburgh. They already have a very big presence in Orange County. Of those 200 employees, 50 are MDs. Many of the rest, a bulk of the rest of the 150 are RNs, LPNs. So these are professional jobs that we were talking about. Ken saying our big concern in New York State here, everybody in this room, is people leaving. And me, one of the youngest elected officials, my peers, my friends, my neighbors, my family, and my generation for my kids, jobs for the future for them. So we are really on top of our game. And now as a curveball, 6 months ago, nobody would ever talk about casinos in Orange County. We now, as of last week, have over half of the casino applications for the Hudson Valley region or in Orange County. And with that, not only is a developer with there, but we have major casino people. Tonight I'm introducing Genting, which I believe is one of the biggest casinos, arguably, in the world, making a major proposal in Orange County today, as well as Caesars and other ones. So we are open for business, and it starts at the local level.
Sure, and we'll return to the casino issue momentarily,
Great.
but I wanted to turn to Mayor Minor. Syracuse is one of these prototypical large cities, used to be a manufacturing hub, used to have a lot of innovation going on. It's seen population declines. What's the most important thing going on now in your city to spur economic development?
Well, what we have been able to do is form strategic partnerships to talk about where our assets are and how we build on those assets. And as Ken said, the regional councils have been helpful to us because it forced people to come together and really think about where our future is and not just talk and pine after the past. And so we've been able to build off of those assets. But part of what local government, particularly cities, struggle with is that we have the largest responsibility for maintaining our infrastructure. And so when you talk to businesses about coming into cities or expanding, which we've been very fortunate in the city of Syracuse to have a burgeoning downtown and really forming partnerships with our county so that perhaps businesses that want a plant or facility type of operation aren't going to locate in the city because we're landlocked. We have a partnership with the county where they can go out to their sites. But part of what they're looking at very deliberately is the quality of the roads. How much do you pay for water? Is your water accessible? What about sewer rates? All of those very prosaic things that mayors have to deliver that when you talk about cutting taxes, and it is a tremendous sort of sweetheart cotton candy of trying to attract businesses here, and I recognize that, having to negotiate pilots myself. But part of what we all have a responsibility, I think, is to realize that local governments, all governments have to provide a certain core level of services. And if local governments don't have money, then they can't take care of the roads, they can't take care of the water systems, they can't take care of the sewer systems. And when 70% of the gross domestic product in the United States is being made in statistical metropolitan areas of between 500,000 and 5 million, which includes all of the thruway cities in it. If those cities are not able to provide those kind of services, then it doesn't matter how many incentives you give to people, but they're going to say, if I can't count on my water coming, or if when there's a fire in my building and there's not a fire person, a firefighter coming, or a policeman when somebody breaks into my car, I think it's all money that's not properly spent for in the long term.
And EJ, you're one of the foremost experts in the state, and you speak out on a lot of these issues. Critique things when you feel like it's necessary. But I want to throw you a curveball. What do you feel like is the best thing the state is doing in terms of spurring economic development right now?
Well, I would say I would begin as I very often do by agreeing with Ken in what he had to say. That the macroeconomic climate is the most important thing, and I do think that. Basically, this year, the state enacted the first real broad-based tax cuts it has done in quite a while. I think the changes to the corporate tax rate are positive steps. I think that the reform of the tax base itself is positive. I think overall, it will help with that, sending that signal that Ken was talking about, that we need to send, because I do think signaling is important. It's like a product. People believe things about a product that may or may not still be true, whether it's an automobile or something else. I don't think it's time yet for people to believe New York is truly open for business or that it's truly a great trouble-free vehicle, but I do think that the signal was a positive one, and that those are definitely positive steps. One unsung positive step gets almost no attention and deserves it in economic development context was the change to the estate tax, which was very, very important. We're one of only 14 states that still have an estate tax. Other states are moving in this direction also. Didn't go as far as it should have. It was definitely a step in the right direction. Thousands and thousands of estates, including many, many mid-sized businesses, are going to be positively affected by that by having the estate tax shadow eliminated. What's not appreciated is that what's left to be done really needs to be done, which was eliminating what's left of it. And perhaps we can talk about it, but it's not well understood. People see that less than 1,000 states may pay it, and they think it's a handful of people. It's like that old lady in New York who spent her last 20 years in Beth Israel Hospital. I forget her name. Very peculiar. There's a bunch of people like that. That's not the case. And for every estate that is unfortunate or clueless enough to stick around and actually be covered by that tax, I think there's dozens, if not hundreds, that are long since gone. Wealth equals capital, and capital equals growth. And if you have a tax that drives away capital, you're hurting yourself. That's a macroeconomic problem. So we've taken a really big positive step that's not getting enough favorable attention to really help that. I think that's a good signal, too. And I think following through with the next steps would be will help fulfill the promise of that.
Sure. And part of the equation is also skills and what skills young people have and what they're learning in college. John Gimberoni, you've studied the skills gap quite a bit. What can you tell us about that in general and in the state of New York?
Sure. We do a lot of work both globally and nationally on this topic, and it's something that Accenture does. Frankly, it's our biggest philanthropic activity, as well as we do a lot of research. And what we're seeing is that pretty much everybody is talking about the skills gap right now. From the president, you heard on the State of the Union, and he's talking about the federal workforce. The Federal Chamber of Commerce has done a research piece on should be the role of business in developing skills. Even the National Governors Association this year, they always have one key policy initiative, and this year it's around the skills gap, and they're looking at more around integrating the whole ecosystem between business and government and education. So, and then, as I mentioned, we and other, private organizations and public-private, so Harvard University is looking at certain sectors, the middle skills, for example, and trying to come up with strategies for that. And I think what we're seeing is that when it boils down to what everyone's talking about, they're coming up with the same types of issues, which is the skills gap is the biggest driver or inhibitor to economic growth. You talk about bringing new businesses into the state. You talk about just your unemployment situation. It's really about matching, doing a better job of matching the demand for business with the skills that are coming out and that are being developed. And really the bottom line is that there's a common belief that it's a complex value chain and it's broken, and that a lot of the funding that we're seeing from the feds, from the National Government Association, it was one of the 3 pillars that I just read about this morning in the press release around the round 4 for the Regional Economic Development Councils. It's around coming up with strategies and implementing on these strategies that will fix the complex value chain.
And I'll open up with questions to the panel as a whole. Anything anyone else wants to add in terms of education, its role in the economy? Okay, we'll jump ahead then. I want to return to casinos. Obviously, that's a big thing going on right now. There are just 22 different entities and submitted bids, a whole bunch of them in Orange County, as you mentioned. What do we think the impact is going to be of casinos? Is this a real boon for upstate New York?
I think it's going to be a great boon, and I think one of the most important questions the state has to ask itself is, what is going to be a sustainable casino? Because we have to not only look for today, but we have to look for tomorrow. In 8 years, the 5 boroughs, at least, will be in the casino business, or could be. So Orange County already is a mecca for a destination for visitors. We have 11 to 13 million people come a year just to Woodbury Commons. I believe it's the 2nd largest tourist attraction in New York State. So rather than just if you build it, they'll come. You need to be able to build it. They're already here, and are they going to continue to be here? So we have that type of mantra. We also have one of the lowest sales tax in the entire region, but we probably bring in as much sales tax as the entire region. So there's a lot of things to weigh in here. We're bringing people in here now. You add some more things to attract them or have them keep or leave their money with us. I think we have a very good recipe for success.
Well, I was going to say that taken on its own terms, if you look at the official projections by the Budget Division in support of the referendum last year, the impact of casinos will be small. The promised good-paying job creation was 10,000 jobs net. That's net of the roughly 3,000 to 4,000 will be destroyed. The region is now filling up with casinos in neighboring states. There won't be a true destination resort casino, much less a world-class one, anywhere. And the largest casino, it's interesting that what obviously would have happened has happened, which is that, in fact, there's a lot of interest in Orange County. Why? I think we know why that is. Orange County is closest to the major market where you can't now open a full-service casino. So I think that, if somebody gets a casino in a small rural area that has absolutely nothing, in that area there will be a net job gain, and there will be something where there was previously nothing. In terms of the overall economy, I think it's a relatively small and, in the future, diminishing impact. And that the best argument I've heard for casinos remains what the governor himself said the way he used to talk about it a few years ago, which was sort of with a shrug saying, hey, look, why should we be the only state not having casinos? Let's keep some of the money here. That's how I would answer that question.
And the governor's also had a broader push for tourism. I mean, casinos are part of that, but he's visited lots of parts of the state. He's had wine summits, beer summits, yogurt summits, promoting local industries in different parts of the state. Have we seen a real impact in terms of tourism growth? I mean, has that really boosted the economy across the state?
I think unless you don't have destinations for people to come in, we have West Point in my county. We have 1.5 million people coming there. But I believe the casinos will help. Again, like EJ said, we're trying to attract people from New York City. They can go 2 hours south to Atlantic City, or we can go an hour north to Orange County. Once you start getting more north, you start going outside of that realm. So I don't know if we see any increase, but we already have these destinations in Orange County to bring the people here.
part of, too, what I think I think it's good that the governor's doing that, and there's a really rich offerings that the entire state has that not all the New Yorkers know. But part of what I think that's proper in his role, but what the regional council has done is that it has, instead of all of us chasing tourism dollars, or instead of all of us chasing casinos, what the regional council has focused on, made everybody focus, and those who have been successful, as Central New York has been, I'm proud to say, is to say, well, let's build off of our assets. So I, as mayor of Syracuse, am not thinking about tourism as the future of my economy. I'm thinking about eds and meds and radar technology and building off the intellectual capital that we have there with all of our colleges and universities and healthcare institutions.
Sure. And then you mentioned the estate tax as part of a broader tax cut package passed this year. What do we think about the other elements of this tax cut package? I mean, you have the manufacturing element, corporate tax rates. I think Ken mentioned the 18A tax credits. All sorts of things are changing this year. How much of an impact will that have?
I think the manufacturing tax is going to be great for us. That's why you had almost a mini war started when you had these regions to the south that weren't included in it. So now that everybody's in it, and I saw Senator Skelos in here before who fought for that, and I think everything is now on an even keel, and it makes us competitive. I mean, Ken spoke about Texas. That's one of our competitors. So in order for us to compete with them, we need to be able to start taking these barriers down.
I would point out, if I may, that, and there's no question that what the state did this year is positive. There's no question it's a positive. I'll make sure I stress that up front. I would point out that the manufacturing tax changes were well worth doing, and that the legislature and the governor could feel in a budgetary sense they could afford to do them, because in fact, our taxes on manufacturing are pretty competitive in New York to begin with. They have been for a long time, since one of my former bosses, Ray Schuler, got together with the state's major labor unions and pioneered in the development of the investment tax credit 30-odd years ago. The effective rate on manufacturers in New York was already fairly low. There's a study the Tax Foundation has done of locations around the country for locating a mature or emerging company. New York came out always pretty well by that measure, even before this tax cut was done. That doesn't mean that this was not worth doing, and again, it was affordably done because the tax was not raising that much money for manufacturers. So as a signal, it's a good thing. As state officials well know, most manufacturing companies are not incorporated. They are flow-through entities, and so for them, they got the property tax credit. But as signals go, it's a positive. You can't say these things are not net positive. But I think we also need to keep them in context. And perhaps we'll move on to this, but eventually, as the mayor was alluding to, there is an issue with local governance and local fiscal capacity that I think has not been addressed or straightened out.
Tell us more about that.
Well, if you look over my shoulder here, there's 2 derelict buildings that were associated with the old Wellington Hotel that are going to be torn down in the next few weeks. They're part of the biggest development in Albany in years. Like all the thruway cities, Albany has virtually no, and I mean zero, market rate development in the commercial, industrial, or multifamily residential sectors. Everything is enabled by a pilot and some package of subsidies, as the project behind me will be. It's a convention center funded by the state. This is a real problem, and for cities like Albany, not Syracuse, but like Albany, Rochester, and Buffalo, that have split-rate property tax structures and structural budget deficits that are fairly sizable. Buffalo doesn't because it was under a control board. This is a huge problem. This city cannot compete and on an even footing with neighboring suburbs without a massive government investment or subsidy program. That's not a sustainable plan for economic growth or for the recovery of Albany. And we have to work harder to figure out ways to make these, to get some recovery going in these cities. I think a lot of it has to be done on restructuring the expense side, but I know it's something that Mayor Minor has worked on a lot. I'm sure Executive Newhouse has to deal with it in different ways.
Sure. Well, in this tax cut package, there was also the property tax freeze, and there's an incentive there to share services with other local governments, or if not, consolidate outright. And I believe actually earlier this year, the governor applauded you, Mayor, and the county executive, Jody Mahoney, for taking steps in that direction already. How hard do you think it'll be to hit these benchmarks to get this property tax freeze?
Well, I think it's important to, as EJ so aptly said, to put things in context. So 50% of Syracuse's property is non-taxable between our educational institutions, our hospital institutions, and then our government centers. And what's interesting is I was talking about the regional council. In my view, each of the regional councils that's been successful has sort of been anchored by a major city in the middle of it. And the way our regional economy in central New York works is that Syracuse is the economic, the cultural, the social, the healthcare center of that region. And so we have a disproportionate number of nonprofits that are there that don't pay property taxes. So we fund our services through property taxes, state aid, and sales tax. My three most expensive services that I provide, that the city provides, are police, fire, and the Department of Public Works. Those are three services that Onondaga County does not provide. So when you just talk about, okay, consolidate, there are clearly examples, and we've already done that in Syracuse and Onondaga County, where it makes sense, so back office rooms or other things. But when you're looking at what is driving our costs, you just have to peel it back a little bit, and you see that it's pension costs and healthcare costs that are overwhelmingly related to police and fire. And going back to economic development, which brings us all here, if we can't provide police and fire, or and we take great pride in Syracuse in being able to plow the snow. If we can't plow snow, then where are we going in terms of economic development? And I don't think consolidation is a meaningful answer to that for the reasons I just gave you when you look at my cost drivers. And then when you start to say, okay, well, what are you going to do? We also provide water for the entire city of Syracuse, which is the center of the economic region. What are we going to do this year because our water structure is 100 years old and because of this incredible winter, even for those of us in Syracuse to say, the mayor to say, the incredible winter that we've had a record number of water main breaks. And so if we can't provide water to those businesses or those hospitals or those colleges, where are we going in terms of economic development? So while I appreciate and understand the kind of incentive that zero taxes provides, if the state comes and says, we're going to do zero taxes for the local government, but guess what, local government, you still have to provide police, fire, and DPW, and all the other things that you do, and we're not going to give you any help, that's where I think that is not a reasonable answer.
I'm a huge fan of the tax cap. I'll probably get clubbed to death by some elected officials, but I've been in the military for 11 years. I've been all over the country, and everybody we compare notes of who lives here, nobody pays the taxes we do, especially where I'm from in Orange County. And we have opportunities where we can save serious money. Everybody in my county has their own police department. Everybody in my county has their own dispatchers. Everybody in my county has one of everything. And if you had a chance to have a government do-over day, would you create local government or Orange County or New York State government the way it is? It is not efficient and effective, and this is a way, the 2% tax cap, even though you can override it, it's a great political tool. Say, sorry, don't blame me, it's a 2% tax cap. It could be politically suicidal and we've seen some elected officials in my region go down because they were a chronic, some people can't get over it. I mean, it's just tough. I mean, the mayor's absolutely right. You're getting clobbered by pension and healthcare costs. They are not at the rate of inflation. So that needs to change. But I see some great opportunities for us to make some marriages between local government. School districts are always in the bullseye. We have more school districts in my region than the entire state of Virginia. Something is wrong. And if you compare notes with people that are successful in growing, southern states, for instance, that's where you get your ideas. It's just tough making those changes. And the mayor, I know, is used to that, and I'm used to the stress that comes with it.
If I could add to, we see a lot of this in our work nationally, and the easy part is to do the spreadsheet exercise and to say, hey, if you could save money if you consolidated your back offices or you did this, you've had 6 or 8 jurisdictions, and you put it up there. The hard part is actually getting the 6 or 8 jurisdictions to come together and agree that, okay, I'm going to give up my fire or my police. And one of the emerging trends that we're starting to see in this is a little bit around an open marketplace idea where, I charge you for providing police or fire services, and that way, you maybe pay a little bit less, you don't have to have your own, I get a little bit of revenue. And, it's coming up in small pockets, but it's something that we see as a future state.
And I'll ask one more question, and then we'll turn it to the audience if anyone has a couple of questions. Obviously, it's a re-election year. Governor Andrew Cuomo, he's started a lot of initiative. Ken Adams and his team have worked very hard. You have the Regional Economic Development Councils, you have Startup New York. How would we assess the governor's record in bringing economic development and jobs to New York? Anyone?
I mean, I just give you, I have a lot shorter experience than the mayor does or somebody else, but like EJ said, it's a good start. We still have a long way to go, but I mean, if you look at us for the last couple of decades, we've been talking about this for a long time. But I'll tell you on the biggest project that we've seen so far is Amy's Kitchen. We had a great marriage. If it wasn't for Empire State Development coming in there, I remember being on the phone with the CEO of Amy's. They were leaving. They weren't coming here. There's 10 other states that can give just as much as we could, and we went over the top. And what we did was we gave them money, partnering between my Orange County IDA and the state by giving them money to do some infrastructure improvements. That sealed the deal, and now I'm going to be welcoming 630 people to a job in a year and a half from now.
My answer would be, at best, mixed. If you want to look at what the actual numbers say, you say, how's things been going for job creation? Job creation in New York since the governor took office, matched the national average for about a year and a half, and since then has fallen off the national average. It's been concentrated almost entirely downstate, and that part has been almost entirely in New York City, with the other chunk in Long Island, which is partly Sandy-induced. Upstate job growth in the last year was absolutely flat and has been minimal over the last 3 years. Now, there's a degree of political simplicity, oversimplification to all this. Governors don't walk in, turn on a switch, and create jobs. But since governors insist on being evaluated on that basis, then I guess they have to be. In fact, there hasn't been job growth, significant growth yet in New York. That ultimately, if you were brought in a class of high school kids or even young college kids and exposed them to a steady diet of press releases from the state of New York going back to the Vince Teasy days, they might be under the impression that all economic growth is touched off by a grant from the state of New York. In fact, all economic growth that matters, that's incidental to economic growth that matters, which is naturally, organically occurring. And for a variety of reasons, we've got a long road to hoe in terms of getting back to that happening. And to the extent I would criticize the governor, I would say, and this is like at worst, I would say, well, it could have been worse. And and I think that the governor has done some very good things, especially the tax cap, and done some other not so good things. It was a long list on both sides. I think that the greatest problem I would have is to wait, even beyond the normal political boundaries, the governor insists on grossly exaggerating and hyping the possibilities of things he does, so that Startup New York, which is an interesting niche program, becomes the answer to everything. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it will be. And that, but understandably, politicians in election years need to hype their accomplishments and exaggerate. That comes with the territory, I understand. But I do think that we've got a long way to go still.
Any other thoughts?
Go ahead.
I would just say that I think that the regional council model has been very successful in terms of Syracuse and central New York. And I guess the metaphor that I would use is if you're building a house, what the regional council has started to help us build that house. But my concern and the concern of a lot of local government officials that I talk to who are providing services are saying that foundation is rotting out. And you can't build a foundation, you can't build a house on a foundation that's going to rot out and expect that that's going to be sustainable or be anything other than press releases, which I think we all want it not to be press releases. We want it to be substantive and sustainable.
I was going to say a similar thing about the regional economic councils, which is I would think about how to measure this, about how to measure success on how well the infrastructure, the value chain around government, business, and education is working. In other words, how well that business demand for skills is being supplied in a very short time period. And I would think that even you could take that one step further to say, if that were up and running, you could almost think about it like a city asset, like services that would attract foreign investment. You could say, besides giving me a tax break and giving me a building to move into, I've got an infrastructure, a value chain that's going to not only produce skills that I need when I move in, but a year from now and 2 years from now, and I'm going to be part of that process.
Any questions from the audience? Right here?
I'd like to ask Mayor Minor, who gave a very good your point about the rotting of the tax base. How much does the University of Syracuse, and Syracuse University, and the SUNY campus there, how much do they pay in services to the city for their water, sewer, garbage collection, police, and so on? I mean, this is.
The answer is not enough.
I know the answer. That's exactly my point. No SUNY campus pays a nickel to any of the communities in which they're located in for their services. This is something I discovered with a client a year or so ago. This is, to me, a complete outrage. I don't know why this doesn't change, because in other states, major universities that help small cities like Syracuse pay a considerable amount, and if you go to those cities, they're very different than for Syracuse and Rochester.
Well, let me just say, though, that Syracuse University, I negotiated what we call a services agreement, what you may call here in Albany a pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes, that has a connotation in Syracuse that I wanted to stay away from. So I negotiated a services agreement with Syracuse University. I approached the 5 largest nonprofits, and the largest nonprofit is the state of New York, and if you break it down further, Upstate Hospital and then SUNY ESF are like 1 and 4. And the state of New York said, no, we're not going to do this. Syracuse University gave me, all total together, a package of about $3 million a year for 5 years. I have to congratulate Syracuse University, because all I had was a bully pulpit. I had no real leverage.
It has to be done negotiated, but it's a question of community responsibility and corporate and community citizenship. So that's very good.
Yeah, and we had our largest private hospital also signed a services agreement with us, but there were plenty of people, plenty of entities who said no thank you, and some more polite than others.
That's the general law, make them all done.
Well, look, we've looked at that, and the reality is we've looked at, can we put them in for our purposes? Most of these nonprofits are located on what we call University Hill. Could we put them in a special district and charge them? And we can't. We can only charge them for what we would call general services. I can't charge them for police, fire, Department of Public Works, which is where all my expenses are going. I can charge them for lighting. I could charge them for other non-traditional things. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. The comptroller said to me I couldn't, so.
One more question?
I'm interested in the new county executive's perspective on this. There are some who have argued that the tax freeze is kind of tinkering around the edges of the problem of excessive real property taxes. Well, the real elephant in the room is state mandates. For
Big time.
example, the state mandated expense to counties for Medicaid. If we attacked that, if we focused on the larger elephant in the room, what do you think? Would we make some more dramatic progress than what we're making this year?
You would definitely make more progress, but I'm a student of history. And since I've seen county executives use this mantra before and before and before to no avail. So I've taken a philosophy, yes, we need mandate reform. I think everybody would agree on that big time. But I've never seen it happen. I worked for the Assembly for a while before I got elected. And what I have seized on is taking the bull by the horns and just doing what I need to do to get things done. So maybe it's that I'm new in my new job right now and take no prisoners approach. But that's why, there's a county executive north of me. I'm a Republican. The county executive north of me, Mike Hine, is a good friend of mine. He's a Democrat. he has a sign on every one of his podiums that say, "Government must change." And that's what I think you're seeing with this new generation of leadership coming in there, saying, we're going to change it on my level. I hope my elected officials, the state senate, the assembly, and the governor are going to change it there. I haven't seen mandate relief. I go to the NISAC things, the New York State Association of Counties, and we push for it every year. Things are starting to trickle down, but nothing to the extent of what we need. So what we need to do is start tightening our belt like never before. Like I'm telling you, cops, different police departments in every municipality. That's ways we can see a huge saving, I believe, on my level. And I'm telling you right now, I think you're going to see it happening in my county and other ones. So you bring up a great point.
And that's all we have time for. If we can bring up the next panel, we'll go right into it. And there are seats up here if anyone wants to sit. Let's give our panelists an applause.